Welcome to Inspired Edinburgh, the home of powerful conversations. I'm Elliot Reeves, and my guest today is Bob Keiller CBE. Bob is one of the most highly regarded and well-respected figures in Scottish and British business. You're the former chief executive of Wood Group, a multinational energy services company which generates in excess of $10 billion in revenue, employs more than 55,000 people, and operates in over 60 countries. In December 2015, you assumed the role as chairman of Scotland's National Economic Development Agency, Scottish Enterprise, a role which you served for 3 years, stepping down at the end of 2018. You were appointed Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 2017 for services to business and entrepreneurship, and in addition to a host of previous accolades such as Entrepreneur of the Year, Scottish Businessman of the Year, and being inducted into Entrepreneurial Scotland's Hall of Fame, you were named as Scotland's Icon of the Year in the 2018 Barclays Entrepreneur Awards. You're a TEDx speaker, a LinkedIn influencer with more than 155,000 followers, chief storyteller at The Lens, and you now act as a business advisor through your consultancy firm AB15, where you work with companies, ambitious leaders, and social enterprises with the focus of inspiring others to succeed. Bob, I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, and you've said everything, so I don't need to say anything more.
Well, that's us. We're done. It's an incredible intro when you read it like that, I have to be honest. And it's genuinely a great pleasure to have you here. I've wanted this to happen for a long time. So.
Okay, thank you.
It's a pleasure. So if we can start by going back to the very beginning, your early life, where you grew up, and generally what that sort of overall experience was like for you.
Yeah, I was brought up in Jedburgh in the Scottish borders. I went to the local comprehensive school, lived in a council house, the same as everybody else did in those days. Mother was a primary school teacher, my father was a labourer. I had 3 elder brothers, and I grew up the same as everybody else, basically. Rugby was the local passion, and I grew up with a fantastic set of friends who are still my friends to this day. And we still meet regularly, and we still sometimes go on trips together with our wives now, and we go and watch rugby, we go and watch music, we go and do different things together. Yeah.
Good stuff. Yeah. Good stuff. What were your earliest career aspirations?
Initially, art was my big thing. I loved drawing and painting, so I wanted to paint album covers for heavy metal bands.
Really?
Monsters and demons and dragons and fantasy landscapes and things like that. But I kind of realised that there's a limited number of people that can do that. And in fact, a friend of mine, a guy called Jimmy Steele, that basically said to me, look, to be successful in that whole world, you not only need to be good, you need to be lucky. And it's a tough gig. At the time, he was studying engineering at Paisley Tech, and I thought, well, I need a career to fall back on. So I thought, well, I'll do engineering. I'll do computer engineering, and went to HeriotWatt. But before that, I'd kind of been exposed a little bit to some business which had kind of perked my interest. So when I was 12 years old, I started a Sunday morning paper round, and it was reasonably successful, and other people started copying it in other parts of the town. So through a series of strategic mergers and acquisitions, I bought them all out, and then had to employ people to work for me every Sunday. So I learnt about cash flow, I learnt about working capital, I learnt about stock. I was able to negotiate discounts with the wholesalers because I was buying 700 papers on a Sunday morning. And eventually, when I went to university, I was able to sell it for a few £100 to my cousin, which funded quite a lot of my social events in the first year at university.
That's brilliant. I mean, we were chatting before, and you definitely seem to have an engineer's mind. You seem to be somebody that really likes systems and processes and the science of things.
Yeah, I like to know why things work. I mean, I marvel at various things. I think, okay, that's great, but why does it work? And what's the kind of psychology behind it? Or why does that work and something else not work in that? So when it comes to business, a lot of my time is spent asking people, but why? And why would you do it that way as opposed to other ways? And why do we do accounts that way? Or why do we do operations that way? Or why do we do logistics that way? Is there a better way, and have we considered all the options?
Yeah. I've just a quote popped into my head that was something along the lines of, the most dangerous thing is to just do things because that's how we've always done them. I'm kind of badly paraphrasing that, but that's the thrust of it. But whereas you can only improve things by analysing and questioning it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good stuff. So I've obviously looked extensively at your LinkedIn page. From 1986 to 2006, you went from leaving HeriotWatt to then becoming a CEO. How did that all unfold?
Well, I left university with a master's degree in engineering. I went to work at Hewlett-Packard out at South Queensferry at the time, working in electrical and electronic design, which I could do, but I found that I didn't necessarily have a strong passion for it. And I couldn't get excited at the coffee machine each morning talking about the frequency response of electrical circuits. I was more interested in talking about the results of the football the night before and things like that. So I realised that I probably wasn't cut out to be in that particular part of the industry. So I changed tack and I went and joined the oil and gas industry. And I went and joined BP in Aberdeen. Joined their graduate recruitment programme, stayed with BP for 3 or 4 years, became a chartered engineer, and then went and joined a small consultancy company. And in that consultancy company, it was a real eye-opener for me because whilst in the big organisation like BP, there are lots of support people round about you. Working in a small business, as you well know, you're it. Who makes the tea around here? It's you. So I realised that I had to learn pretty quickly about lots of different elements of business, including sales and selling and execution and various things, about quality management and things like that. So I spent 2 or 3 years there, and then I was kind of enticed to go and work offshore as a supervisor. So I went offshore working for a company called Hess. Worked as a supervisor. I hadn't told Hess at the time that I was actually a chartered engineer. So when I started making comments on engineering proposals that were coming through, eventually people would say, well, what do you know about it? I'm saying, well, actually, I know about it because I've designed these kind of systems before, and the way you're designing it it's not going to work properly. You need to do it a different way. So I got found out. So I got hauled back on shore again, which was interesting because at the time, whilst it was a promotion, I lost all my offshore allowances, which meant that my finances were on a knife edge. About the ability to pay my mortgage versus how much I was earning. So basically cycled to work for about 2 years, no holidays, sold the cars, all the kind of stuff that you do just to kind of hang on by the fingernails, and then eventually things began to ease as I managed to move into other roles. So I went from engineering to maintenance to operations to asset management to project management. And then eventually in 2002, I was made an offer basically that said, look, the way your career's going, you really either need to think about moving to New York, which was the company headquarters, or actually maybe your next career move is outside the organisation. Now at that time, my eldest son was getting ready to make the transition from primary school to secondary school, and the last thing he needed was instability. And I had no strong passion to move the family home somewhere that would actually, from an ego point of view, New York, wouldn't it be great, how good it would be? And it could have been fantastic. But on balance, it probably wasn't the right thing to do. So I went back to my boss the week after that conversation and said to him, thanks for setting the options out, here's my resignation. I went and joined Halliburton. Halliburton at the time had pulled me in to see if I could pull together parts of their organisation in the UK. And then about a month later decided they were splitting the organisation in two. And I thought, oh, fantastic. So I ended up joining the engineering part of Halliburton, which is called KBR, Kellogg Brown and Root at the time. And I went in as the UK manager of their business, which was struggling at the time a little bit, and helped them to kind of turn that around by asking questions about, so why are we doing this, and why are our costs not as competitive, and why is our message not as clear, and why is our sales process not as effective, and why is our customer program not as good, and so asking all sorts of questions, and managed to create a little bit of, from going on a downward spiral to a steady upward spiral. And then in 2004 I was asked whether I'd take over the global business for what they called production services element of KBR. And it was at that point there that I kind of was exposed to the overall KBR leadership team in Houston, and that's when it became apparent that they didn't really value the part of the business that I was running. They felt it was low margin, they felt it was kind of a little bit kind of poorer performing in other parts of the business. And yet when I looked at it, I thought, actually, the business looks fine, but it's been given a whole bunch of overhead costs from the head office that's nothing to do with the business that make it look anemic. And I thought, without those overhead costs, business is actually not too bad. So I thought, I'll buy it. So I went back and said, look, I didn't have any money. I didn't know where I'd get the money. I didn't know how to raise the money. I hadn't done that sort of thing before, but I thought I can ask people. I can go and find out. Lots of people in Scotland that can give you advice, and lots of people will help you without asking for a fee in return for it and things like that. So I went and asked lots of people, and they said, yeah, if you want to do this, there's different ways of going about it. But you do know that if you go and ask to buy the business, you might well get fired. I went, yeah, it's a possibility. So I flew to Houston to meet the CFO of Halliburton Organisation with an offer to buy the business, myself and my colleague Duncan. And at the time we thought, we might get fired here. But we had an insurance policy, we'll buy return tickets, so at least we'll get home. And the flight home's about 10 hours, so we thought we've got enough time to tell the stories we're going to tell our wives as to why this is a great time for a career change, great time to leave this business and do something else. But ultimately they said, look, we're keen to hear what you could offer us for the business. So we had to raise some money to buy the business, and that's where it takes us to the 2006, the creation of PSN on the 1st of May 2006.
Got you. It's quite a journey.
Yeah.
You one of the quotes on your LinkedIn bio is, I started out with 2 people working for me and ended up with over 40,000. And I was thinking about the sheer magnitude of that is actually quite difficult to comprehend. But in what way did you have to evolve as a person in order to lead a company of that size?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a sudden transition. It's a steady thing of managing small teams to bigger teams to teams of teams to running an asset organisation. So when I was in Hess, for instance, I was running an asset that had teams offshore and onshore, elements of the team doing lots of different functions, and running teams of people who had skills that were far superior to mine in specific areas, like geophysicists and petrophysicists and people like that working for me. And I really had to, move from supervision to management to leadership and recognize that it requires different things at different points in time. And that was an evolutionary journey rather than something you just say, right, just let me at it. I know how to do this.
Yeah.
And like anything, you learn by training, by watching others, by making mistakes, by reflection, but mostly by doing. I think leadership's a contact sport. You've got to be out doing it rather than just talking about it. And sometimes you get it right, sometimes you don't get it right. But ultimately, it comes down to me about saying, well, it always comes back to people, and being able to understand people, being able to listen to people, to be able to communicate with people, has been the kind of cornerstone of that journey that says, actually, whether the team's 50,000 or 5,000 or 500, the challenges will be the same. You can only talk to so many people in a day. So who are those people, and what do you talk to them about, and what do you listen for, and how do you organise yourself to be as impactful as possible?
I'm just curious as to how you you sort of navigated your way to becoming, because it's very difficult. One person is the CEO in an organisation. How did you go about influencing and getting other people to kind of buy into you as a person?
Yeah, I don't think there was ever an agenda to buy into me as a person, because I'm not selling me.
Okay.
When I took over as CEO of PSN, my strong belief at the time was that as a business, for us to succeed, we'd have to be as good as our competitors, but better to deal with. We were starting in a very competitive landscape against some very big and able competitors. So what would mark us out? We needed to be the kind of company that people wanted to work with. So I recognised that having a unique culture was an important thing. So I wanted people to buy into the culture, not to buy into me. So the culture was built on the core values. It wasn't built on my personal values. They were built on agreed collective core values of the business. So then I spent a lot of my time and effort of showing people why this was important, showing them examples of what happens when we do it or we don't do it, reinforcing the message continuously, talking about it all the time, being totally sincere and authentic in that communication, and realizing that if you tell somebody something once, it probably is not going to work. If you tell them it 10 times, it might work. If you tell them 200 times, eventually they're going to say, "You're trying to tell me something." And that's what it came through, was this continuous obsessive process of communicating something consistently, ultimately in an organization that was diverse and it was spread across multiple geographies and that. It still worked, and I think most people would have bought into it and said, actually, yeah, the culture is a bit different. It's interesting how people's memories play, though, for instance, because a lot of people I used to work with, they'll say, "Yeah, we had a great culture from day one." I'm saying, no, on day one, our culture was exactly it was the previous day before we owned the company.
Yeah.
I said, so it evolved over time, and in my mind, it took a couple of years for us to be able to make something that people could actually touch and feel and say, "This is different. This is different from where we were." And there was a lot of heartache on that journey, because a lot of people start from a position of, this is management nonsense. Somebody's swallowed a textbook here, somebody's been on an MBA course, none of which I had done. How do we know this is going to work? So people kind of want evidence. They want to know that what you're talking about actually makes sense. And once you can give them that evidence, some of them, they drop their cynicism, but some of them, they take more than that. It takes a number of years before they say, they grudgingly admit, yeah, there's something in this. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to come to core values, because I know that that's an area of, I guess, expertise, or has become that. I just need to ask you this. I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you who your worst boss was, but your opening statement is, "Some of my bosses were idiots, some were bullies, others were really great people." Who is your best boss, or who was the person that inspired you the most?
That's a good question. I've had lots of good bosses over the year, and I worked for a couple of guys when I worked in Hess. I worked for a guy called David Hayes, who was actually a really good boss to work for. I worked for a guy called John Reed, who was a really nice guy to work with as well. John liked his detail. David liked to make sure that you were networking and listening to other people and things like that. So good guys, good solid guys I worked for. And when I joined the Halliburton organisation, I tended to be working my bosses were overseas.
Okay.
So I didn't have that close of a personal relationship with them. So that was an interesting challenge as well, as to how do you manage a relationship when somebody's living in a different country and you only see them from time to time and things like that. I worked for a guy called Tig Slattery, and Tig was a really nice guy to work for, and listened carefully to what everybody's opinions were on everything, and gave me a lot of direction as well.
Good answer. It's a difficult question.
Yeah.
Defining core values is relatively easy. Sharing them is simple. Making them real is very, very difficult. The first question that I have is most fundamental. Why are core values so important?
When people talk about culture, they usually say, "Oh, culture is just the way we do things." I'm saying, yeah, okay. And that's fine, providing everybody knows what that is. Because in one stand, they might say, so what defines your culture? Oh, our culture's not written down. It's just there. You can feel it. I'm saying, what does that mean though? And is it consistent? Now, in some family businesses, I'm sure that the culture never has to be written down, because everybody knows who everybody is and how they behave and what they stand for and how they act. And maybe in some small businesses, you never have to write that down. But ultimately, once a business gets beyond a medium size, then you can't expect the new recruit to understand the culture of a business that was started 10 years before that. Because they don't have the stories, the myths, the legends that go with it. They don't have anything written down. They kind of just have to absorb it and hope that they get it. For me, that's too high risk. So one way of helping to kind of crystallize or define a culture is to set aside and say, well, what are the values that it's built upon? And then what are the rituals and rhythms on top of that actually define what decisions get made, what choices get made, how do people get treated, how do people behave? And the core values are effectively the bedrock, I think. One way of doing it. I'm sure there are other ways of doing it as well. But for me, having really strong and clear and authentic core values is a great way to begin the discussion about, okay, so what kind of culture do we need? What kind of culture do we want? What kind of culture are we prepared to commit to?
Yeah. So do you feel that the core values define the culture?
They do, in many ways, providing the core values are genuine, they're authentic, they're broad enough to capture who we are, and yet precise enough to define how we behave. And that is a careful balance, because I've seen all different variations on the spectrum there, from one word core values that actually are a bit meaningless and a bit, they float about and mean nothing, all the way down to people having pages and pages and pages of backup material that people really can't remember, they can't take on board. And so as an intellectual exercise, it's thorough, but as a communication exercise, it's ineffective.
Yeah. So what is the process in delineating and implementing a business's values?
Well, I mean, it kind of starts by saying, okay, well, what are we all about and what makes us different? And I use the metaphor of the DNA fingerprint.
Okay.
The individual elements may on their own seem pretty obvious. So for a company to say integrity is a big thing for us, you could say, well, that's hardly surprising. But it's only when you combine it with 3 or 4 other things you think, oh yeah, that's pretty unique. That's your DNA fingerprint. And therefore defining that kind of DNA fingerprint, this is how you would describe us. These are the minimum number of things you would take to describe who we are and what makes us different. And then from that point forward, you can say, okay, if that's our core values, so what does that mean? What are we going to do with them? How are we going to define them? So one of the things we did, we'll look, if our core values, if we can't fit them all on one page, then we're probably doing too much writing, because we need stuff that is easy enough to communicate and for people to listen and learn. So for each value, when we set up the PSN core values, we talked about, why do we care about this? What does it mean for everybody in the organisation? And if it doesn't impact people in the organisation, is it really a core value? So that was a good little test. And thirdly, what does that imply for the organisation towards everybody? And then for each of the core values, we assigned a colour, because it's easier to remember if we continuously reinforce things with a colour. We used Renaissance art as the inspiration for the colours, so there was a story behind the colour. So the story was another hook to get people to remember what the core value was and things like that. But the core values are only of any use if they're used.
Yeah.
So actually talking about them all the time, sharing examples of them being used all the time, sharing examples of what happens when they're not being used, all of these things kind of eventually build up a momentum towards saying, actually, this is helping to shape how we behave. This is helping to shape what decisions we make. This is helping to shape the choices we're making and the actions we're taking in a way that people are saying, well, that actually sets out who we are. And that's what customers ultimately bought into, and it's what staff bought into, and it's really what investors bought into.
I think it was in your TED Talk you said that if people are misaligned with the values, I mean, that can ultimately end up with them losing their jobs.
Yeah.
Which is how I guess it should be.
It has to be, otherwise you're saying this is our culture, but it's okay for Harry to not buy into this because he makes us a pile of money. That can't be right. You have to either be in for the culture or not. From my point of view, otherwise it is just window dressing.
Yeah.
And there are lots of organisations that I've seen, I'm afraid to say, where the values say one thing, but the behaviours are actually quite different. And I think, well, actually, it's just marketing. And that's fine if it's marketing material, but if you really want to make a difference in an organisation, then your culture can help to mark it out as being different from your competitors, and ultimately can be a route to success.
Yeah. So tell me a bit about the work that you're doing now then. I mean, you've got your headline things are doing core values, business storytelling, practical leadership, inspiring entrepreneurship, and growing businesses. How did they become the things that you're passionate about? And
yeah, it's a good point, actually. I mean, the easy option for me would have been to step down from a full-time business leadership role and to take on a portfolio of non-executive roles, and to move from meeting to meeting and listen to problems and help others and things like that. And I thought, yeah, I could do that, but is that really what I want to do? And I'm not sure it is. I thought there are people out there that I think I might be able to help that I would never get to meet if I spent all my time in that type of career, when I'm just basically, chasing from meeting to meeting and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, no. I need to do work in the third sector. I need to know more about the public sector. I've spent all my time in the private sector, so I'm only going to learn if I kind of go and expose myself in other areas. So joining Scottish Enterprise was a great way of finding a place where I would be more networked in the public sector. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, that gave me time to then go and do more work in the third sector. So I've been working a lot with various charities and charitable organisations and social enterprises to understand some of the challenges they have and to see in some areas where I might be able to help them. And certainly I've been able to help them working with a guy called Steve McCready through the Lens programme. Mm-hmm. We work with a number of different organisations, and we're able to bring entrepreneurship into the third sector in a way that works. And it's been really, really interesting to see the results, and it's really been quite satisfying to see people getting a step up and getting the confidence and the inspiration to help them on that journey, which has been fantastic. I couldn't have done that if I'd just been doing a series of chairs of this organisation or non-execs here and things like that. So what I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to help people that I think can benefit from any of the experience that I might be able to bring to them. Mm-hmm. And I'm doing 4 days a week unpaid.
Right.
To help people, basically. So I'm helping entrepreneurs, as you said in the list there. I'm helping entrepreneurs, I'm helping charities, I'm helping public sector. I do charge the occasional private clients to cover my costs, but I don't get paid myself. I just kind of use that to fund my kind of travel costs and stuff like that.
Really?
Like that. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's very admirable.
Well, I could go and play golf, or I could go sit in the sun somewhere and read books and that, but I'm too young. I know it doesn't look that way, but I am.
That's quite fascinating. I mean, it's very telling of a person that you would do that as opposed to leap into the next big thing. Because we spoke briefly beforehand. Opportunities are there. Yeah,
but a lot of it has to be down to say, well, actually, I've recognised a long time there is this idea about we've all got egos. And would you be doing something for the ego, for the label of something, or for the feeling of that defines you? And I thought, well, actually, I've managed to live with the fact that I don't need a label. I don't need to be the boss of this organisation or the CEO of that organisation or to have a gold card with every airline in the world and things like that. I can get by fine without that series of self-identification. And I'm happy just saying I'm just a guy that helps other people. So you'll notice, on my LinkedIn profile, for instance, I just call myself a business advisor. Uh-huh. I don't say I'm a CEO of this or a director of that or anything like that. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe at some point in the past I would have wanted to have those labels to kind of give me that kind of maybe that self-assurance or that self-esteem. And I'm thinking, people take me as I am now. If I can help you, that's great. If I can't help you, I'm equally willing to admit that I'm not the right person to help you. Yeah.
So how did you, that fascinates me. How did you go through that? I don't know that you even necessarily call it a transformation, but to the point that you're not necessarily driven by ego.
I was brought up in a place where, anybody that kind of got above themselves it was quickly pointed out to them. And because I've still got a lot of friends that I've grown up with, I've got lots of friends in the Aberdeen area as well, and that, if they thought I was being a little bit up myself, they would tell me. They would tell me. My wife would tell me. My children would tell me and things like that. So I've always been brought up to try and be humble, try and be honest, try and be normal, try and be decent. But sometimes, I've done roles that have required me to take a more prominent role. But I'm not taking the prominent role because of I wanted the exposure. I'm taking the prominent role because that was part of my role and my job. So I kind of separate those two things out. So it's this idea, well, I don't need the kind of the position to satisfy me internally. I'm quite happy with the fact that if I can help people to make a difference working with some charities, that probably adds more benefit to society than me traipsing into a boardroom and saying I'm the big I am. That's it, yeah.
100%. Yeah. That's brilliant. I'm going to ask you about LinkedIn, actually. When did you find out that you were going to be made an influencer? Because there's not many people that have that.
No, there's an
label.
owl flew in through the window one day with a message on it. I was approached. I can't remember the route that specifically, but I was approached to say, look, at the time it said there's 300 influencers in the world out of 300 million. So they're saying literally it's a 1 in a million opportunity. And I said, okay, but what is it? And I was looking at LinkedIn as a way of helping to kind of, from a business perspective, to say, well, if you're on LinkedIn and you've got a profile, people will be able to see what that is, and therefore they may be attracted towards the business. Mm-hmm. So again, it was done from a point of view of saying, well, how am I going to attract customers and talent to come and join a growing business? And then when the guys at LinkedIn approached me and said, okay, so all we really need you to do in response to this is to write articles on a regular basis.
Right, okay.
And to participate in discussions from time to time. And that's it. And I thought, well, it's a pretty low level of commitment required. So I went on to LinkedIn and I thought, I'll do this. But it wasn't until relatively recently that I had my first ever training session on LinkedIn. It's a chap called Mark Williams, who's the UK's first LinkedIn full-time trainer.
Right.
And Mark came up to Aberdeen and I was doing something later on that day with him. And I said, well, can I come in and sit in on your training? He said, absolutely. And I learned a lot on that day, just to the power of the kind of social media and business networking online now. Mm. And I don't use any of that power at all. But if I was in the business of trying to make connections or establish leads or sell things and that, there's a whole raft of things that can be done nowadays that just weren't available a few years ago.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. I mean, really fascinating stuff. I'm thinking, wow, it makes sense, but it's quite scary in a way. So for instance, on LinkedIn, using a simple kind of piece of software, I could do a personality profile of anybody that's on LinkedIn. So that before you go and speak to them, you can tailor your message and you can work out what things might or might not work with that particular person. And the personality profile appears, given I've tried it on 1 or 2 people that I know, to be pretty good, pretty characteristic of the person that's being tested.
Really?
Oh yeah.
That's quite scary.
It is scary, yeah.
I need to ask you this question, and it's sort of a big idealistic question, but if you were starting a business tomorrow, from the ground up, what are the first things that you would do?
Well, I mean, I did start a business.
Well, of course, I know.
Yeah, I started a business recently.
I suppose
I started my own little business recently. I'm thinking, so what's the starting point for that? I'm starting to think, what's it all about? Work out the why. Okay. It's a bit of a cliche, the old Simon Sinek thing with the 3 circles and that. Work out the why and be really clear on the why. Then you can look at the how we're going to behave to deliver that why, and then you can work out so what do we need to do to be able to do that. And often when I'm working with businesses and that, I go to them and say, okay, so why are you doing this? And if people say we're doing it purely for the money, that's fine, as long as it's clear. If they say we're trying to build this kind of business over this area, fine. But often we're saying we're doing business because we can, because people have asked us to do things, so we're going to do more, and we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that. I'm saying, but why does this all hang together? What's the underlying principle? What is it you're trying to achieve here? Get that pretty clear up front. Now, you can always change it. You don't need to set it in stone. You can always change it and say, you know what, 2 years into the business, we thought we were going to be heading in that direction, but actually we've turned out we're going that direction as well. That's fine too. But having that clarity up front that says, this is why we're doing this, it allows then other decisions to follow in a way that says, okay, so we know we shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
Or we know we should definitely be doing more of that. Or why we're spending our time across here when we said we wanted to do more of this. And it just kind of really get those principles set out up front before you move on the journey. Where I spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs and that is they'll come up with a product or a service and they'll say, well, look, this product or service is clearly going to be hugely successful. And I test that. I test that with them and I'll say, so tell me that. Why do you think that? Have customers bought it from you in large numbers for large lumps of money? The answer is no at this stage. So why are you convinced that this is right? And how are you going to define that and describe it to other people in a way that's going to convince them? how are you going to persuade them that what you truly believe in your heart of hearts is actually real? And that comes back down to influencing skills, persuasion skills, communication, business storytelling, and all the other things you mentioned on the LinkedIn profile there.
Mm-hmm. How would you go about leveraging technology or something like LinkedIn to grow a business?
Oh, there's fantastic opportunities to actually connect with people and to get people's attention. So instead of cold calling somebody, you can warm call them by participating in the same conversation as them online. You can also find that very quickly you've got common connections, so you can get an introduction to somebody rather than going in totally cold there. You can find out a lot about them, including their personality test we talked about. So you can find out more information nowadays about people than perhaps you ever could in the past. So from a business point of view, social media tools nowadays have to be part of your arsenal of kind of marketing and business development focus there. Otherwise, you're missing out. Similarly, I wouldn't discount Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all the other things that in 5 years' time people will say, oh yeah, they've all been replaced by newer equivalents. But the principle being is that if you've got a source and access to information and connections and the ability to get people's attention for your product or service in a positive way, then you would be, I think, a bit naive not to use all these channels.
That's a great answer. I like that. I'm going to ask you about Scotland.
Aye.
Scotland. What are your overall views of business in Scotland? What are some of the things that you think we should or could celebrate? And what are some of the things that you think we could improve on?
Okay. It's a big, wide-ranging question.
Yeah.
If we look at the Scottish business landscape, we've got a small number of large companies and a large number of small companies. And not too many big, medium-sized companies. And I think that still remains a challenge for us. I mean, people call it scale-up. But the problem with scale-up is people use it in different ways. Some people call scale-up is what happens after startup. Some people call scale-up the move from medium to big, whatever it is. But I'm just talking about medium-sized companies becoming reasonably big companies and becoming bigger companies that can service both a domestic and an international market, that potentially to get there, they buy other companies as part of their growth trajectory. We don't do enough of that in Scotland, and as a result, we do end up with this kind of long tail of small companies and a small number of large companies. And I think collectively we would be better if we were able to encourage more of this idea of scaling up and giving people the ambition that says running a small business is good, but why not run a bigger business? Why not be more efficient and more profitable? Why not create something that actually can leave a bigger mark on the industry and on the world, whatever it is you're trying to do? So I think that's one of the big challenges that we've got. Conversely, I think in Scotland we've got a pretty good business support network, both for startups and for other businesses. I think that what we do in Scotland in terms of the work of the various agencies, the various membership organisations, the various incubators, accelerators and things like that, it's come a long, long way. And I see it's a bit disjointed, but I suppose in an entrepreneurial ecosystem, what you don't want is a static system that's going to stay in place. You want a little bit of fluidity and a little bit of organic growth and maybe even a little bit of competition there, etc. But that landscape has certainly grown quite significantly over the last few years, and that has to be encouraged, and we need to do more of that.
Yeah. I'd like to just pick up on the first point that you made, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, I can sort of relate to that to some extent just through conversations that I've had with people who are in the startup phase, especially in the sort of tech arena.
Yep.
Because a lot of them find that they get to a certain point where they've gone through various funding rounds, and then in Scotland there's this sort of ceiling, and then they need to go to London, and it's like those guys there are playing a different game because they're looking for millions and millions, not hundreds of thousands. So how do we bridge that gap? I
don't think that where the money comes from determines where you need to run your business. So, I mean, I borrowed $300 million to start a business, but based in Aberdeen. I didn't think just because I was borrowing it from people that were based in London that I somehow needed to gravitate towards London. So I think, when you're funding a business, you have conversations about funding relatively infrequently. You have conversations about staff and customers all the time. So if you're serving a market, then that's probably where you need to be based initially, is to say, well, if my market is Central Scotland, I probably need to be based in Central Scotland. If I need to get funding that's not available through the availability of private equity or venture capital in Scotland, then is it such a big deal to say, okay, if I need to go to London, I need to go to London. If I need to go somewhere else, I go somewhere else. You know, I see this conversation taking place. You know, people in Aberdeen say, "Oh, if you need funding for there, you need to go and speak to the business angels, and there's more of them in the Central Belt." I'm saying, and get on a train, go do it.
Okay.
And if you need to go to London, get on a plane, go do it. You know, just don't worry about the fact that we don't have people standing about with big bags of money to fund your business locally. It's a small world. You know, just travel, contact people online, do what you've got to do, and don't worry about necessarily the fact that, oh, you know, it's just not available locally. I'm saying, so what? Which business has been prevented from growing because of that? So I don't recognise it as being the same problem as others perhaps do.
Okay, so geography shouldn't be a limitation.
It shouldn't be. Well, if you want it to be a limitation, of course it can be. But if you're prepared to travel a bit, if you're prepared to go and speak to other people, then what does it matter?
I suppose whether you determine it to be a limitation or not is just a matter of perception, really.
I think so.
Yeah. Great stuff. I'm going to ask you a few of the bigger philosophical, slightly deeper questions. I mean, it seems apt that I start with values. And it's quite a difficult question if it's not something that you've given any forethought. But do you have a set of personal core values, or you know, is that something that you have personally?
I mean, I was thinking that you might come up with something like that, and I'm thinking, so what are the values that I've assigned to my current business that I'm kind of trading through? And there are 4 of them, and the first one's about learning and innovation and always looking for ways of improving things. Second one's about inspiration and inspiring others, and how do you inspire others? And then it comes to communication and talking. There's something about fun. Life's too short not to have fun. Whether it's in business world or any other organisation. And really the last one's about being effective, making a difference, making a positive difference in whatever you're trying to do. So you've got LIFE, life.
Oh, I love that.
So that's the kind of thing I'm saying, that's the kind of principles there that I'm saying, that's trying to guide my new business. If it doesn't fall into those areas, then we're not going to do it. If it does fall into those areas, then we should do more of it, yeah.
Okay. That's a great answer, actually. I'll just quickly share with you my own personal values, because I sort of sat and figured that out for a while. My acronym's not as good as yours. Mine's CHAIR, which is more accidental. Compassion, humility, authenticity, integrity, respect.
Like it.
I
like it.
Quite good. It needs more fun though, Bob. Needs more fun in there. I like that. That's good.
Where's the F in chair?
Oh, big question. You spoke about Simon Sinek and his why. What do you feel is your own why, or maybe your purpose in life?
I don't think I've got a single guiding purpose there that says, you know, I've got this calling that says I must achieve this by this certain point, etc. But life's a short, ephemeral thing that passes very quickly. We've only got a short period of time, and we get a choice. We can either kind of sit at the front of the bus and drive it, or we can sit in the back of the bus and go where somebody else wants to steer it, take us on a journey. And I'm thinking, no, you've got to kind of try and drive your own bus, do what you want to do. And for me, that's about actually leaving the place in a better condition than it would have been. So it's about making that positive difference that I just talked about under the values there. It's about inspiring others to do as much as they can and to fulfill their capabilities. And en route, it's about learning all the time, whatever we're trying to do. So it comes back to that kind of, those principles are encapsulated in that set of values effectively. Yeah. And I want ultimately that, I want my friends and family to kind of respect me for who I am, and not for any fancy labels or gongs or awards or whatever that's out there, and just say, well, actually, I'm doing this because I can. I'm in the fortunate position that, I can spend time helping others without expecting to get paid for it. And it's a choice as to whether or not I spend my time doing that or spend my time doing stuff that's maybe a little bit more self-indulgent. And I choose at the moment to say, actually, I'm going to spend time helping others.
Do you think that's likely to change over time?
Yeah. I mean, I would never say that it's set in stone at all. I may find that I'm doing more of some things and less fewer of others. So for instance, I mean, in the last couple of years, although I never really set out to do this, I get more and more people asking me about business storytelling and about presenting and about pitching and things like this. And I'm thinking, once I start sharing my approaches and methods and things like that, more people get interested and they want more people want to learn about it and things like that. So I've been doing more of that than I'd kind of really planned or thought about doing. But clearly people have got an appetite for it, they enjoy it, they benefit from it. And for some of them, it opens up doors for them and allows them to kind of move on with their own business journeys.
Yeah. Just in very brief, what is your approach to that, the business storytelling?
So when people talk about business storytelling, often they'll say, yeah, but it's just presentation skills. I'm saying, well, it's a bit more than that. The methodology behind actually how do you prepare to do any form of kind of pitch, presentation, public speaking, whatever. For me as an engineer, I need to know what's the method, what's the process that applies, etc. So if I'm asked to do a public talk, usually, unless I'm given at least 6 weeks, I'm going to say I've not got time to prepare, so I can't do it.
Wow.
And I do 60 or 70 a year at the moment.
Jeez.
Second thing, so that you've got a process that you need to work out what your process is. How many rehearsals do you need? Most people don't do any rehearsals at all. And I'm not sure why in business they think they can get away without rehearsals. In any form of other performance art, rehearsals are just part of the process. Criticism and feedback is part of the process. In business, we don't do criticism and feedback. We just say, that was lovely. Yeah, well done. Yeah, I really liked your talk. And it's just pat on the back, really. It's not really the truth. So you need to get real feedback. As a control systems engineer originally, feedback is critical to control anything. So without feedback, you can't control it. And I would say it's the same about improvement in business and presentation. So you need that feedback loop. The second thing is about structure. You know, if I'm going to talk to you for 10 minutes, I've only got 10 minutes. So why would I spend 8 minutes talking about me rather than talking about what I can do for you? Yeah. So the structure has to be in something that makes sense from a point of view. If I'm there to try and, you know, give me a job or, you know, buy my goods and services or you know, lend me money or whatever, I need to be focused on the purpose of there, and therefore there's a specific structure that I would talk to people about. How do you structure things in such a way? And the third thing is, stories are a fantastic vehicle for carrying information and messages, but most people dismiss stories as being, that's what children talk about. Yeah, we use stories all the time in our own social lives, and yet very few people translate that idea of taking a story into a business context effectively. So what I've spent a lot of time is actually defining, well, okay, what is a story and how do you bring it into a business context? What's the structure of a story? What are the key elements of a story? What's the ingredients? What's the recipe? How you put it together? And then how do you tell it in such a way that people will remember it forever?
Yeah. It's very powerful.
You talked about my TEDx talk, for instance. My TEDx talk is really 2 stories. It's a 12-minute talk that consists of a 4.5-minute story and a 7.5-minute story. And both stories have got exactly the same underlying structure. And I take the structure of one, and then one links into the other, and then the structure of the other, and that's it. The good thing about stories is when you're presenting, they're easier for the presenter to remember and easier for the audience to remember. But the good thing about it really is that people will remember them for a long time. Whereas if I give you facts and figures, you might remember them for a short period of time, but they're not going to stick with you because there's no reason for them to stick with you.
What does the future hold for you, Bob? Where do you see yourself in 5, 10 years?
That's a good question. I've got no clear plan there. Having stepped down from the role of Scottish Enterprise, I still think I've got more that I can offer in a broader business context somewhere.
Okay.
Don't know what that is yet. I've discussed a few things with some people that haven't quite kind of fitted where I think I can add something there. I've looked at a few entrepreneurial businesses and I've thought, do I want to go and start something again? Do I have the appetite for it? Things like that. And I'm thinking maybe helping somebody else rather than actually doing it myself. But I don't want to do that to restrict the ability to carry on helping others. I think the third sector is an area where being able to bring more business practices into the third sector can potentially help the efficiency and effectiveness there. And I think there's people that will benefit from a lot more help there. So how can I help to scale up some of the support that is given to the third sector? So that's an area of looking at that, particularly from a Scottish perspective at the moment. But who knows? Who knows is the real answer.
Yeah. What would you like your legacy to be?
A legacy? Do I want a legacy? Yeah. I mean, I could say, well, actually, you know, at the end of the day, once I kind of move on from this mortal coil, you know, I'm beyond caring at that stage. So I'd like to have a place in people's hearts that they think there was somebody that was a good guy that made a difference, fun to be with, really effective at what they were trying to achieve. Christ, we learned a lot.
That's a great answer.
So I mean, I've not really thought too much. I'm certainly not thinking I need to have the cricket pavilion at the local school, or I need to have my name in lights or a statue and like that. So nothing like that at all. It's more about for the people that I make connection with. Can I make a difference for them? Can that difference be a positive difference? And is it something they'll remember fondly?
How do you define success?
I think success for me is being able to devote time to the things you really want to do. A lot of people are caught in a place where they have to do something because they've got an economic obligation.
Yeah.
Or they studied the wrong subject and they realise I wanted to do this, but actually I've not got the qualifications to do it, and I can't afford to go back and retrain and things like that. So finding that point where you're actually doing something that you want to do, not just like doing, because we might like doing lots of things, but you want to do it because it's a thing you know that you can and should be doing. So for me, the idea of being able to spend time working with lots of different groups and helping lots of different people without feeling that I need to charge them for the privilege of it is great. And that for me is one definition of success.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Now, you're not going to like the answer to this because this is what I call the Hello Magazine questions. Where you're looking, what's the one book I should read to change my business prospects? What's the one piece of advice? So I tend to push back a little bit on these kind of reductionist questions that say, can you summarize something up in one phrase or one book or whatever?
Yeah,
and I'm thinking, I'm not going to give you a pithy quote here and says, you know, as Mahatma Gandhi once said, blah blah blah. I'd much rather say, like, you know, there's a series of different things that you learn on the journey, and you learn on the journey early that, you know, you treat people the way that you would like to be treated yourself. As you get older, you treat people in a way that you'd want people to treat your kids as well. Or you treat people in a way you'd like them to treat your parents or your in-laws as well. So that idea of kind of mutual respect, I think, grows over time, you know, about how you deal with people and things like that. The idea as well in terms of, you know, it's okay to ask questions, it's okay to be wrong, it's okay to say I don't know, it's okay to show a bit of weakness, it's okay to be vulnerable. All of these things, again, you kind of learn over time. So somebody had told me years ago to say, when you're doing public speaking, it's okay to forget your words. It's okay, because actually it turns you into a human being. And as a result, people empathize with you more rather than being absolutely word perfect and slick in every single step of the way and being so polished and professional that you've rehearsed everything. And people can shy away from that. Whereas if you can actually acknowledge the fact that, look, I'm struggling here just like you would be struggling.
Yeah.
There's, you know, people empathize towards you. So there's lots of things that, there's not a specific bit of advice, but lots of things that I've learned on the way that I try and pass on to others. And I'm saying, look, a lot of this comes with time. And a lot of it is about just being normal.
Yeah, yeah. I was rather hoping you would give me the skeleton key to unlocking fortunes in that answer, Bob, but it was a good answer nonetheless.
Yeah.
If you had the opportunity to speak to your 20-year-old self, what would you say?
Yeah. So when I was 20 years old, 1984, I met my wife. We've been together ever since.
Wow.
Three fantastic children, which has been a fantastic time. But at the time when I went into business, I had one club in my bag, which was I thought that logic would be the answer in business. I thought if I can see that something is wrong and it needs to change and it'll be better, then surely, logically, everybody else will get it. And it took me a long time to understand the nuances that people don't operate that way. Mm-hmm. Some of us do, some don't. And you need to develop better strategies for influencing people. You need to actually understand how people operate, what motivates them, what their fears and concerns are, all that kind of stuff. So I would say to my younger self is to study people more, become a better communicator, understand how to learn and listen from others, and don't think that you know everything.
That's fantastic. Spoken from somebody who has learnt, the right way of doing that, yeah.
And still learning.
And still learning.
Yeah.
Last question's a big one. If you could change anything in the world, what would it be and why?
There's huge inequality in the world. And it's a lottery. If you're born in one country, your fortunes are one way. If you're born in another country, your fortune's another way. Mm-hmm. And there's something here about I get really worried when people start thinking we need to put up barriers, and the way to solving problems is to put up trade barriers or immigration barriers and things like this. And anything that we could do to actually reduce the inequality globally has to be a good thing. And I hate to say it that the political structures that we have in place don't necessarily help that, because ultimately people want to assume positions of power, then they want to keep themselves in power, and that corrupts and distorts things round about actually, well, what's the decent, honest thing to do? We see it in this country, we see it in other countries and things like that. Wouldn't it be great if there was a more forward-looking, outward-looking political landscape that said, look, actually, we're all in this together ultimately, and there's going to be 9 billion of us by the middle of this century, and we need to make sure that we look after the planet, but we can feed all the people we've got on it. We improve healthcare, education, opportunities, aspirations, way beyond our kind of local boundaries and national boundaries. Mm-hmm. So the only thing I would change about the world is everything.
Oh, wow.
I'm not sure that makes sense as an answer, but there's lots of things that I you wouldn't do it this way if you were starting with a blank canvas, would you?
Exactly. Yeah, quite right. Wow.
I mean, short-term political cycles are a problem in many places, where there isn't enough time for people to make a real difference, and they're always looking over their back to say, well, actually, what do we need to do to make sure we stay in power at the next time of asking? And I think that drives a lot of short-term and populist decision-making that ultimately I'm not sure is for everybody's benefit. And I'm not suggesting we should somehow do away with a democratic process, but there's something here about the need for a longer-term horizon and a more outward-looking horizon, rather than banging the drum and saying that they're bad and I'm good, and my stuff's always right and their stuff's always wrong. So this kind of competitive process, that it's a shame that the Scottish Parliament was set up potentially to be a different type of debating forum, and yet we've ended up with quite a lot of just head-to-head, she said, he said, kind of you're right, I'm wrong kind of politics again. I'm thinking, it kind of demeans us when our response to one of our political opponents is always to say, I don't know what you've said, but I know it's wrong. It's not right. No. We should be willing to operate together where we agree on things, and willing to challenge each other deeply when we genuinely believe that there's a better way of doing things, rather than this kind of political rhetoric that says, if you're going to start testing in schools, then I'm going to go against it on a matter of principle. And you think, oh, come on, guys, there's bigger fish to fry here. Let's kind of join up and work together rather than always working against each other.
Brilliant note to finish on.
Okay, thank you.
Bob, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here. I've absolutely loved this conversation.
Thank you, Elliot.
And thank you so much for your honesty and delivering massive value. So
thank you so much, Elliot. Thanks for the opportunity.
It was a pleasure.
Cheers now.
Cheers, Bob.